Hi everyone, my name is Katerina Stoikova, and I'm here with poet, editor, teacher Marianne Worthington. She's the author of the poetry book The Girl Singer, published in 2021 by Fireside Industries, and we're going to talk about that book as well as other topics. Hi Marianne, so
Hi.
so happy to talk to you today.
Thank you, Katerina. Thanks for inviting me.
I've been wanting to um, talk to you about this book ever since I saw its cover on, on social media. And to me, this book is a symphony of sorts. It encompasses the voices of generations, of the natural world, as well as the voices of professional musicians, some better known than others. I feel like this book taught me a lot because it opened the door to a different kind of upbringing and different kind of music. So the names, except for Dolly Parton, of the female musicians, were unfamiliar to me. I have to admit that. And I was a bit concerned whether I would be able to ask adequate questions. But honestly, I was mostly concerned about embarrassing myself. And I'm going to risk that here in the open. So I was wondering if you could introduce the book to our listeners. I would love to hear you speak about it.
Thank you. Well, I'm actually glad that you maybe weren't familiar with some of the singers that are referenced in the first part of the book, because part of my goal was to educate readers about women who were involved in the early days of commercial country music and folk music who have gone unrecognized and who have been forgotten, and have been not as well preserved perhaps as some of their male counterparts. So that was one episode of the book that I wanted to get out there. So it's okay if you don't know the names of or unfamiliar with some of the music. But I also wanted to pay homage to my family, who were great sort of homegrown musicians. They were really good singers. Some of my family members could play instruments. They didn't sing professionally, they didn't play professionally, but I grew up around music constantly. We listened to music in our home. We went to church a lot where there was a lot of music. I had a really beautiful and important music educator in the church just about my whole life. And that was really important to me. I had beautiful and long-lasting memories of piano teachers. So I grew up with music. So I wanted to pay homage to my family. So that's kind of the second part of the book, is about mostly my parents, because I wrote a lot of the poems as they were sick and dying and coming to the end of their lives. And then the last part of the book sort of just became poems about nature and being part of a particular landscape in rural southeastern Kentucky, which is not all that different from East Tennessee, where I grew up. So that's kind of the gist of the book, the three movements. You mentioned that you thought it was a symphony. I like that. Thank you. But yeah, so there's three movements in the book, like a symphony might have, or a piece of music.
I thought that the book was brilliantly organized. That,
That
yeah.
that was not me. That was my editor, Silas House, who really helped me to get the poems in a particular order. You know how when you write something and you can't see your own mistakes or weaknesses or errors. So I had lived with these poems for so long, I just had sort of given up on how to group them together. So he really helped me with that. So I can't really take credit for the organization of the book. That was really, a lot of that was Silas helping me with that.
Oh, that, he has done a wonderful job with the wonderful work that you had. And I believe that these poems have been written over quite a bit of years, right? I mean, I know
Correct.
that I have published one of them in the short poem anthology in 2011.
Yes, yes, yes. So yes, I'd been hanging on to these poems for a long time. So yes, some of them are old poems that I'd just been hanging on to, and then some of them were very, very recent. In fact, I added a poem at the very last minute after the manuscript had already gone, it had been turned into the publisher, and I called the publisher and said, "Can I add one more poem?" So so there's a wide range of time that passed between the poems.
Well, would you kindly read to us several poems from the first part?
Sure. So the first part of the book is really about the girl singers, and I'll read the title poem first. And the girl singer is sort of an imagined singer. And by the way, I should maybe explain the nomenclature. The girl singer was a term that was given to women who performed on shows that primarily featured men. So it would be a male act, like the Porter Wagner show, and his girl singer was Dolly Parton, or the Wilburn brothers had a show and their girl singer was Loretta Lynn. So there was usually a comic, a girl singer. Sometimes there were other acts, but they were not the headliners. They were sort of second fiddle. So one of the things I wanted to do was kind of revalue and re-honor the girl singers and bring them to the forefront. So this title poem is the imagined voice of a girl singer who grew up knowing and singing murder ballads, which is another topic in this first part of the book. And so she quotes from murder ballads throughout this poem, and it's kind of a defense mechanism that she has because she understands that her status is the girl singer. And well, maybe you'll see. So you might know some of the murder ballad lyrics that you hear in this poem. So this is the title poem, The Girl Singer. How hard it was to hold my body against defeat and come to be known as just a girl singer by those men who said, "We're doing you a big favor, honey." Once I sang the lonely songs I loved. The A minor chord on my black Gibson hummed lonesome as a grave. I strummed right through their promises, crying, "Oh, the dreadful wind and the rain." On stage, I was one notch below the gap-toothed hayseed in his checkered jacket and short pants, clowning around with me as his sidekick, and we'd laugh and laugh. I dug on your grave the better part of last night. Too sorrowful, they said, the bosses. Heard enough about sick-hearted boys chasing aggravating beauties, poor orphan children dropping and dying in the snow. War was over, they said. Be old-fashioned, but not too much. How hard it was to fetch my voice for chirpier songs. Oh, the cuckoo, she never hollers cuckoo. I wore down, I mourned, the women killed and all the murder ballads I knew, bludgeoned, stabbed, drowned, floated downstream to the miller's cove. He made fiddle screws from her little finger bones. So I had to quit singing our songs. Her clothes all wet and muddy, they laid her on a plank. So I'll read a couple of the barn dance poems next. One of the things that I researched to write this book were the lives of women who performed on the barn dance radio shows, which were very popular country music shows broadcast on radio. The most popular one was the National Barn Dance, which was in Chicago, which ran from the 30s into the 80s, I think. So there were a lot of women who performed on the barn dance radio shows, but they didn't have a lot of power. So here's one about their costumes, which they were assigned to wear. Barn dance costume. This is sort of a protest poem. Reject the lace petticoats, the rickrack hems, reject the gingham bonnet stranglehold, the myth of calico for modesty's sake. Forsake the man whispering backstage your fate, his eyes green as dollar bills. Kick off your lace-up boots and ankle skirts and wail the blue notes that howl your heart's longing. Hop high and belt out the one about my Lulu gal wearing that red dress from the railroad man and those shoes from a driver in the mines. Stay in the pit with the rough and the rowdy. Hop high. Don't look behind. And here's one called Barn Dance Roadshow. Again, this is the imagined voice of a particular girl singer. Barn Dance Roadshow. Hungry as she was for fame, she never thought they'd change her name or dress her up in homely cloth and make her say those scripted jokes. She never thought she'd have to ride the waves of heat all summer long to hawk the barn dance radio in close school halls and fairground tents. No one said she'd bear alone the blues, the cramps, the damp-filled nights, the silhouettes on hotel walls where her name in secret she would write in letters of bright gold. She couldn't know the sacrifice to sing the lonely songs she loved would be rough travel with quarrelsome men who never guessed her given name and didn't give a damn anyway. So that's 3. Is that enough from that section?
Well, that gives me an opportunity to ask a few questions.
Okay.
And you alluded to compromises the women singers had to do in order to make it in a men-dominated industry.
Right.
And
They had to give up a lot. First of all, they had to give up their names.
yes,
And you know, listen, it's not unusual for stage performers to take on a stage name. I mean, people do it all the time and we don't think anything about it. But usually if you're going to be a performer with a stage name, you get to choose your name. But
right.
that was not the case, especially for the barn dance women. They were assigned a name, they were assigned a persona, they were assigned a script of things that they could say and couldn't say on stage. They were even, you know, they even had to maybe adapt what instruments they played. For instance, Lily Mae Ledford, who was a Kentuckian and grew up in Powell County, Kentucky, went to the National Barn Dance at age 19, and she showed up in, you know, a tailored blouse and a wool skirt with her hair pulled back, ready to play the fiddle. And the first thing they did was they made her put her hair down. They told her to play the banjo, not the fiddle. And, you know, they put her in sort of 19th century homespun calico cloth and that was her persona. You know, there was another woman at the National Barn Dance named Linda Parker who became at the barn dance, her persona was the little sunbonnet girl. But in truth, she was a nightclub singer in Chicago that they recruited from the bars and the nightclubs in Chicago to come sing on the barn dance. So she, you know, had to give up everything, including their names. So they gave up their names, they gave up which instruments they they could play, how they could dress, and they didn't have a lot of control over their own careers as managers. They weren't, and a lot of them didn't really even have the opportunity to make recordings until much later in life. So they weren't offered recording contracts the same way that men might have been. So there were they made a lot of sacrifices to play music.
And what about the research you did? Did you do a lot of research for this book?
I did, and some of it was intuitive because my parents were so well versed in country music just by being long-term listeners. And also Knoxville, where I grew up, has a long history of country music radio. And so they'd been longtime listeners to Knoxville country music, and they knew locals. We watched it on television as well. There was a grocer, a man who sold groceries, who had a music show every morning on television. And Dolly Parton would come down as a child from Sevierville and be on his show, which I would watch in the mornings because it came on before Captain Kangaroo. While I was waiting for Captain Kangaroo, I could see local performers. So part of the research was intuitive, and just knowing that my parents knew so much about country music, and that taught me a lot, just, by, I don't know, osmosis, or it wasn't formal training. But Berea College has a Sound Archives Fellowship, and I applied for that fellowship. And so I spent a summer in the basement of Hutchins Library in Special Collections at Berea College, where they have vast sound archives where I could listen to old radio shows, or I could watch recordings. And also I could look at letters and documents that were in the file. So that was a great boost to my research. It was wonderful to spend a summer in the library to study about this kind of music.
To me, that sounds like potentially emotional time too. The whole book with the awe and connection with the natural world, and the second part, which is deeply personal. And I see personal elements in the first part as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a poem, there's a little sonnet about my grandfather, who I didn't ever know. He died before my parents ever met, but I know that he was a musician. But I think he had problems. I think he was probably an alcoholic, although no one in my family would ever say, but I have his instruments. I have his fiddle, and I have his banjolele, and his mandolin. So I know that he was a musician, but it was real hard to get my father or his sisters to talk about my grandfather. So yeah, there's some personal parts in the first section as well, even though it's primarily about the girl singers.
Well, I guess I'm gonna ask it. I had a question now that I was wondering whether I should ask or not. What would your parents think about the first part?
I think that they would have liked it. I think my mother especially would have liked it. And I think that she might have also been quick to point out maybe any errors that I might have made in documenting the lives of those women, and I think my father would have liked it, although he did not read very well. And so I don't think he would have read the book, but I think my mother would have read the poems to him. They were both very supportive of the writings that I did when they were alive and were able to enjoy them. So I think they would like it. And I think that they would, I especially think they would like the poem about the honeymoon trip to the Grand Ole Opry that they made,
Yes. Yeah, to me, that was deeply moving poem. And since we're talking about them, why don't we hear several poems from the second part?
Okay, all right. Let's see. Let me read. I'll read the first poem in the second, or let's see. There's a couple of poems about Knoxville here that I can read, and one about a couple about my grandmothers who were great influences on me. Here's one about growing up in Knoxville. Almost everybody has this kind of person in their neighborhood, a person they see who is maybe without a home, without maybe any stable means of employment, but they see them all the time in their neighborhood and they don't know much about them. That was, this poem is about that, and about this man who everybody saw in Knoxville, but nobody knew much about him. But everybody called him the Axe Man, ACTS man, Axe Man, because he had Bible verses on a bike that he rode around town. This is Pentecost, 1965. First Creek churns under the Fifth Avenue Viaduct in the old part of town. Brick warehouses testify to a Sunday shifting toward a lazy haze. Summer is coming. The girl watches for the Axe Man, riding his bicycle down Central Avenue. He's duct taped plastic sheets to dowels, built to shelter so he can ride in all weathers. She likes to read his hand-scrawled signs fixed to his bike tent, verses from the Acts of the Apostles. At church, the preacher could call him a witness for Jesus, but the Axe Man is black and poor, ignored, even though we all see him every day. He pedals down Magnolia Avenue like it's the road to Damascus. The preacher cries about tongues of fire and a mighty rushing wind, but the green branches sway easy when the Axe Man passes. After church, the girls' great feast will be killed lettuce and onions, side meat and skillet cornbread set atop a formica table. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Here's a couple of poems about, I'll read a couple of poems about my parents. This one about about my father. This is a sonnet, Slow Dance. I hear the meter of my father's gate, his walker clattering through the hallway, then a rest while he pauses for a breath. His withered leg and foot disobey like an errant child lagging behind. We bend and lift his limbs so he can sit to watch ball games, outfielders leaping for the catch. Every morning he leans against the sink, looks out the kitchen window for yellow buses hauling children, or for the trash men. He studies the neighbor boy, chest thrust into the yawning mouth of his pickup. I used to adjust my timing, he says, then turns to start his noisy waltz again. And here's another sonnet, this one more about my mother, although my father makes an appearance. Corvus. My mother works the crossword while we wait for my father to die. I imagine his father, with his pretty fiddle, his hateful temper, standing on death's logging road to meet his son. My daughter's nightgowns flutter forgotten on the clothesline. In sleep, she is my mother reborn. Ready or not, our days begin on black wings and end the same. The crows strut and squawk their dim song. Caw is a three-letter word for mockery. Into our yard, they come marching like drunken soldiers. Mother hates this murder, but feeds them stale bread. knowing they steal our brightest treasures for their nests.
Thank you so much, Marianne. First, I had never heard of anyone feeding crows before I read
Oh, really?
No. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a family of crows that lived around my mother's house for decades, and they knew her, and they knew when she was coming out to feed them, and she fed them almost every day. And so they would stay in the trees across the street, and they'd see her come on the porch, and they'd start to come into the yard. So yeah.
So they were practically family members.
Yes, they were.
Did they have names?
No, I think my mother named one because there was one that was recognizable because it had kind of a gray streak down its back, so it was really recognizable. But yeah, she fed them for years, and they would have I knew that they would have certain calls. Like if I pulled into the driveway and got out of the car, they would greet me with a particular call, But if a stranger pulled into the driveway, there was a different kind of call. So it's really fascinating, the language that they use. Yeah.
Well, over and over in this book, there is the connection that you're making between songbirds and humans singing. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I don't know that was all that intentional on my part. I think that was sort of innate and intuitive, and it just sort of worked out that way. I do have a real fascination.
It works beautifully, yes.
Well, thank you. I do have a fascination with birds, and I do love to watch birds. And I'm pretty fascinated with really ordinary birds, bluebirds, mockingbirds, crows, mourning doves, robins, starlings, blue jays. Those are the main birds that I see around my own neighborhood, and I do watch them. There's a little family of bluebirds that have lived around our house for a long time, and in the summertime when the air conditioning is running, the air conditioning runoff will make a little puddle in the yard, and the bluebirds line up for baths. They use that as a bird bath, and they do it consistently and at a particular time of day. It usually starts about 4:00 in the evening. They'll sit on the top of the roof and they'll fly down, and one will take a little bird bath and the others are kind of keeping watch. It's really fascinating. So you get to know what your own backyard birds are doing. Yeah. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about that connection too much, Katerina, about birds singing and humans singing. Oh.
It's part of the symphony.
Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah.
Well, another connection that I see throughout the book is the connection between religion and music.
Right. Right. So the Pentecost poem, for instance, draws on the scripture from Acts that talks about the Pentecost and the ascension of Christ into the heavens. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm not a religious person. And I'm not, I don't practice church going regularly, but I did as a child. I was sort of, we were very active in a church when I was a kid. But like I say, I got mostly music from that experience. But yeah, I think there are maybe some connections to religion, more so spirituality rather than a particular doctrine or being indoctrinated, I think.
Well, to me, the book owns the origins of the music. And, you yourself have been a church musician, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was bring a lot of music to these poems. And one thing that this may be hard to explain, but I have a collection of hymn books, and in every hymn book, there's usually what's called a metrical index. And that index will indicate the number of syllables in a line. Okay. And so every hymn is assigned a metrical sort of signature. And so sometimes when I get stuck writing a poem, I'll go to the hymn book and I'll look at the meter. And so it'll be, say it's 6464 or whatever. And I'll try to write a poem with those syllables just to get started. Sometimes the poems don't stay that way in meter, but it's a way for me to get started. So I was always grateful that I learned about how to count syllables and how to do that measuring while you're singing. It's been a great help to me in writing poems. It really has. I think probably, I don't know that this is true, but I think probably I learned to read because I always had the hymn book open on Sunday mornings, and my mother would point to the words as we were singing a hymn. And so I think probably I learned how to read really early, and I was an early reader because of the hymn book.
Great. I would love to hear several poems from the third part now.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll open with the first song, which is called Ballad. And it sort of echoes back to the first and the second part. Ballad. Sycamores jut above a daybreak wet with steam. The groundhogs are making coffee. The heron flies above the tree line, drumstick legs stretch rigid, wing flap on the upbeat like a crooked song wounding the sky. A family of house finches makes a dust bath in the gravels at the end of my driveway. They strum and pluck every shimmering day, while the worm entombs, while the bud weeps on the vine. I've been broadcasting seed in memoriam. My mother loved the killdeer. Her mother despised the blue jay. The melancholy of its cries, like a wretched old love song, hummed over and again. Okay, here's one called Small Town Gossip. The best place to hear it? Not in the beauty shop, that warren of backcombing and flaming hearsay, nor the church house where prayer requests stand in for scandal. Do not listen for it in the garages where men gather by twos and threes, gripping their coffee cups and old grudges, or in the dollar store where old couples block the aisles, comparing ailments, and dog-tired young women run in for cheap diapers while their men wait for them, smoking in idling cars. You won't hear it in the grocery store either, as aggravated shoppers fume into their phones while stalking the aisles. The best place, just listen, the best place is before good daylight, when the mockingbird practices his scales, when the redbirds wake and cheer each other to the day's work, chipping seed, ignoring the propaganda of jaybirds and crows. And here's one more. This might speak to this idea about religion that you referred to earlier, Katerina. This is called Gospel Song. When the Cooper's hawk slammed into the corner wall, I thought the neighbor boys had thrown a baseball at the house. In my rush to chase down those kids, I nearly missed his ringtail, his speckled breast that looked for all the world like a designer cable knit sweater, how he looked for all the world like he was just tucked down for a nap, his neck bent just so. Every day since, I've yearned to find a wonder in my yard, a wish for personal salvation. Each morning, my friend remembers a hymn to sing aloud while she waits for the coffee to piss into her cup. Keurig hymns, she calls them. If gospel songs are all that remain of my childhood dogma, can I still be saved? Even if the creeds still slink around after me sometimes. I don't know. Isn't dread now marking my dark path that leads to the forest where I bury the hawk? The woods at the edge of my yard shelter rowdy birds who like to fight and holler, their chatter like gunfire. Even the tiny wren, so fierce in her competitions, built and rejected 3 nests in my garage, one in a snow boot, one in the toolbox, one behind the paint cans. I stay out of her way and try to ignore the blue-tailed skinks who colonize the cracks along my driveway.
Oh, I love these. Thank you for sharing. Uh, you say that you're easily entertained / obsessed with the the wildlife around your home. Do you make it a daily practice?
I did, especially during COVID times. Not that COVID times are over, but during quarantine times, I should say. Yes, I did. And it just so happened that at the same time, there were 2 properties on behind us and on the side of us that had been abandoned, and they'd been abandoned for years, which meant that the trees and the bushes were unkept, the yards were unmowed, and so that attracted a lot of interesting wildlife, particularly rabbits, but the birds had a big time too. And there were a lot of, I would see, little skitters of field mice. So there were hawks in the yard too.
And the groundhogs.
Yeah, yeah. And groundhogs. So yeah, that now those 2 properties have since been bought by other people and have kind of been cleaned up. But the groundhog comes back every year, and the rabbits haven't moved out. So but yeah, I am very easily entertained, especially when we couldn't get out as much, and I spent a lot of time looking out the window.
Well, you say that you're married to a person who collects toys.
I am, yes.
So were there enough toys to play with during?
Well, that's the thing. See, I'm not allowed to touch them. I mean, they're here in the house, but we don't play with them. Yeah, I don't touch them because they're very sacred to Keith, and so we just admire I just admire from afar his museum of toys. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time just looking out the window and watching the wildlife. Yeah.
I want to ask about the first part again. There is a
Okay.
murder story told from the perspective of 4 of the participants. So, first of all, is it a true story?
Yes, it is a true
Okay.
story.
Okay.
And so the legend of Tom Dooley, as his name became known in popular music, his name was Tom Dula, D-U-L-A. And so there was a murder of a woman that he was courting, Laurie Foster, but he took the blame for the murder and he was hanged for the murder, but it's unclear if he actually committed the murder because he was also involved with these other 2 women who were jealous of Laurie Foster. And so some speculate that maybe these 2 women actually killed Laurie Foster, and then, went free. So nobody really knows for sure. But yeah, part of it is a true story in Wilkes County, North Carolina, and it happened during the Civil War. So the late 1850s. Yeah.
Well, I
So
found
what I wanted to do in that sort of possibility was to try to narrate what happened from 4 different points of view. So we have Tom Dooley's point of view, and then the 3 women, Laurie Foster, who's the murder victim. And so if you've ever heard, and the other 2 women who were cousins, Annie Foster Melton and Pearline Foster. If you've ever heard the song Tom Dooley, the Ballad of Tom Dooley, it's told from kind of his point of view, where he's blamed for killing Laurie Foster and he's hanged for that crime. So, but it's the truth is, it's speculative, because no one's really sure who killed Laurie Foster.
someone needs to make a movie about it.
I think there probably have been movies made about it. And the Appalachian author Sharon McCrum wrote a book about based on the Tom Dooley legends. Yeah.
I have a good friend who told me that when she was young girl, she would ask her grandmother to play that song about Tom Dooley over and over and over, and she would just cry her eyes out. For whatever reason, she wanted to be sad, and whenever she wanted to be sad, she would just listen to this one. And I don't know, maybe that explains the story of past lives. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. But I wanted to include that because, there is a section there are murder ballads that show up in that first part of the book, and so I wanted to try to do that. So that started as an experiment, and it just kind of turned into these 4 points of view.
How much music did you listen to while putting the book together or while working on the book?
A lot, and I still do. I mean, I made a playlist on Spotify that you can find. It's called The Girl Singer. It's under my name if you're a Spotify subscriber, which is sort of music that inspired me to write the poems. But mostly, but yeah, I listen to a lot of music, a lot. Yeah.
And did I see correctly on Facebook that there has been some performances around connected to the book? Tell us, please.
Yes, in fact, it was this weekend, on Friday the 13th in Newport, Kentucky, at the Campbell County Public Library. The Falcon Theater in Newport did a Reader's Theater production of several of the poems. They were mostly the music poems in the first part of the book. And so they read the poems, and then there was music by the Kentucky group Raison d'Etre that was interspersed with the readings, and it was wonderful. And it was so kind of otherworldly to hear the words that I'd written be read by other people, and to be an audience member in that. So it was a strange experience, but it was wonderful. It was very wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, I believe that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the cover image?
Yes, the cover image is the artist who did the cover image was at the time an intern for the press. I think she now works full-time as an artist and illustrator for the press. But the press asked me for inspirational images. And so what I did was I sent several, but one thing I did was I took some stills from home movies that my mother had made of Dolly Parton when Dolly was about 14 or 15 years old and came to Knoxville to sing. And Mother took me and my little sister, and we went, and it was an outdoor event, and Mother took movies. And so I took some stills. And so the cover is of course, not Dolly's face, but this is Dolly's outfit that she was wearing in the movie that my mother captured, holding her guitar. So that was sort of the inspiration. I'm so lucky to have this cover. I think it's such a beautiful, evocative cover. And so I feel really lucky and grateful for the cover.
Well, I think it's lovely. Could you please tell us something about Fireside Industries?
About what? I'm sorry.
Oh, your publisher, Fireside Industries.
Yes. So Fireside Industries is the imprint, is one of the imprints of the University Press of Kentucky. And it's a partnership between the University Press of Kentucky and the Heinemann Settlement School. And Silas House is the series editor. Rebecca Gale Howell was instrumental in beginning the partnership and was the first editor of the series. And they've published about, I don't know, maybe half a dozen or a little bit more books. Jane Waldrop's Drowned Town, a series of short stories, is in this imprint. Most recently, Patricia Hudson's book about Rebecca Boone called Traces, which is a Kentucky Humanities subscription pick for this year, is part of that imprint. So that's the connection. It's the University Press of Kentucky in conjunction with the Heinemann Settlement School.
Okay, great. And you are a long-standing editor, I think founding editor of Still the Journal.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us about that wonderful journal. That has done great service for so many years.
Thank you. We started in 2009, and I started with Silas House and Jason Howard. We were the three founders. And so I edited poetry, Jason edited creative nonfiction, and Silas edited fiction. And Jason left to edit Appalachian Review at Berea College, and Silas left about a year and a half ago so that he could concentrate more on his own writing. So our editors now are Karen Salyer McElmurray, who's creative nonfiction editor, and Julia Watts, who is the fiction editor. And so it's an online journal. We publish, of course, those three genres, but we try to also have an interview every issue. We publish 3 times a year. We try to have an interview. We try to have some sort of multimedia focus that honors Appalachia in some way. And we have book reviews. We have craft lectures. And it's been going strong for, since 2009. So 13 years.
So I have a couple more questions, and one of them is, what are you working on now? What are you working on now?
I'm working on another collection, and I think that I probably have enough material to make a second collection. I'm just not sure yet how it's all related. So I've got enough poems and some prose pieces, or prose poems maybe, that I think I could fill up a book. I'm just not sure that how they all go together yet. So I've been working on that, and so I've been revising and revising and revising. So that's really what I'm working on immediately, in the most immediate time.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
And I hope that in not too distant future, we have another conversation for your next book. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I hope so too, Katerina. Yeah.
Yeah. And last, there is a question that I ask all my guests who have taught creative writing. And throughout the years, I'm sure I have asked you this question before, and you're allowed to have a different answer.
Okay.
Whenever I'm asking myself that question, I have just different answer based on my needs at the time. And that is, what is the most important thing you teach your students? If there is one thing you want them to remember from your class, from your workshop, what is it?
I think it is to trust the sound of their own voice. And by that, I mean, think about the ways that you learned to talk, that your family talked. It's unique to you and unique to your family. And that can be a building block that you can use to find and manifest in poems or prose or whatever you're writing. I think we often second guess ourselves and we don't trust ourselves, or we hear that little voice in our head that says, you can't do this, you don't know how to do this, or you've been told that you don't have a voice. So I would say learn to trust your first voice, the voice that you grew up with and the voice that your family used to talk, because that can be a real building block for writing.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And good luck with everything. And thank you very much for coming to talk to me today, taking the time.
Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you.